were visiting this institute.
Y la posibilidad de insertar el programa que tienen ustedes
And the possibility to exchange with you, porque sí es parte del programa,
un encuentro
to have this meeting
con el objetivo de evacuar algunas preguntas, informaciones
with the main objective to provide information and answer your questions
con relación a la actividad y las relaciones entre Cuba y los países africanos.
in relation to the relationship between Cuba and African countries.
Con los cuales, por supuesto, tenemos una gran deuda también.
And we have a great debt with those countries too.
Primero, la nacionalidad nuestra está conformada por un componente negro también,
Our nationality is confirmed by a black component.
independientemente de la colonización española
Outside the colonizers
y, por supuesto, de algunas otras migraciones que tuvieron lugar en Cuba y de los
and other
indios
migration we had in Cuba, including Indian native.
autóctonos que estaban aquí a la época de llegar los colombianos.
Those who were here when the colonizers came to Cuba.
Me parece que, bueno, el panel estará integrado por mí, yo me llamo Darío Urra, como dijo la
Again,
compañera.
Darío Urra is his name. Urra, U-R-R-A.
Vicepresidente primero de la Asociación de Amistad Cuba-África.
Also the first vice president of the Cuban Association of Friendship, Cuba-Africa.
He sido embajador en varios países africanos
He's been ambassador in different African countries,
y estoy jubilado en estos momentos.
and he is retired now.
El compañero Oscar Oramas Oliva, que es también vicepresidente de la asociación,
Oscar Oramas Oliva, who is also a vice president of the association.
que ha tenido una prolífera actividad diplomática y
He has
política.
had a deep diplomatic and political activity.
Que ha sido director del Departamento de África de la Cancillería,
He was the director of the Department of Africa.
ha sido viceministro del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores,
He was the vice ministry of foreign affairs ministry,
atendiendo fundamentalmente en su tarea África.
working basically with Africa.
Ha sido también embajador en Naciones Unidas
He was also an ambassador at the United Nations.
y por otro lado también desde el punto de vista de su actividad diplomática ha sido embajador
And he was also an ambassador
en Angola.
in Angola.
Por lo tanto tiene un vasto conocimiento del continente.
So he's
africano.
got a great knowledge of the continent as such.
El compañero Ángel Dalmau
Ángel Dalmau,
ha sido también embajador.
he was also an ambassador.
Estuvo en Sudáfrica y en Namibia.
He was in South Africa and Namibia,
Como embajador cumpliendo sus ambiciones.
working as an ambassador.
Ha tenido también una prolífera actividad proyectada hacia el continente africano,
He had an intensive activity working in Africa,
sobre todo en lo que respecta al cono sur africano.
southern part of Africa.
Y ha tenido contactos muy directos con los presidentes,
And he had direct contact with the president,
sobre todo con Mandela, Kanuyoma
especially Nelson Mandela, San Nujoma,
y otros dirigentes.
and other leaders.
Por lo tanto, yo le voy a ceder la palabra también a ellos
And they will also have the possibility to talk.
y después estaremos en disposición de establecer un diálogo
And then they will be open to questions, to a dialogue, to change,
y responderles las preguntas que ustedes quisieran formular.
and they will answer all your questions. Okay?
Les reitero que estamos muy satisfechos de recibir un grupo
Again, they're really pleased, they're really happy to welcome a group like this one in
que
this
siempre
space.
contribuirá al acercamiento y las relaciones entre
That
ambos
this will
pueblos.
help to strengthen the relation between both countries
Y entre nuestros países,
and between our countries,
y incluso también, aunque sea un granito de arena,
and even a little, a small sound of grain
desde el punto de vista de proyección futura,
for the future projection
que en algún momento se pueda arreglar este diferendo que nos
that
opone
we can solve the difference that we have today.
desde el año 59, podemos
Since
decir,
1959, we might say,
hablando de la última etapa ya de la revolución,
talking about the last period of the revolution,
sin referirme a la época de los españoles, ¿no?
without mentioning the period when the
Con
Spanish
las
conquistadors were
intervenciones
here
que tuvieron lugar por parte de los gobiernos
and
de
the U.S. intervention.
como lo ha dicho Raúl Castro, por supuesto,
Like Raúl Castro, a president,
que
said,
nosotros hemos estado dispuestos a sentarnos a conversar
we are open to talk
con el presidente Obama,
with President Obama
desde incluso antes cuando ganó las elecciones la primera vez.
when he won election the first time. Our country was open to talk to
Llegó a expresar
Obama.
que lo mismo en Cuba, que en Estados Unidos, que en la
And
base,
Raúl
o sea,
said
el
that
escenario
the scenario could be in the U.S.,
fuera
in
factible.
Cuba, at Guantanamo, in Guantanamo, no?
Sí, en Guantánamo.
Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo, any place.
Incluso dijo que estaban en esa disposición,
He said that Cuba was ready to
sin
talk
condiciones
without precondition
en ese caso.
in that case.
Y por lo tanto, también tenemos otros diferentes que no es el tema de que nos ocupa hoy, que es el trabajo que se está haciendo por la liberación de nuestro
And we also have another topic that is the work that we are carrying around the world for the Cuban Five, political prisoners in the U.S.
Así que bueno, le cedo la palabra, compañero. Antes que el compañero Dalmao exprese.
So before Comrade Dalmau talks,
Acabando lo que decía Orama,
just to reinforce what Orama says,
hace poco menos de un año,
about a year ago,
el gobierno de la República del Congo,
the government of the Republic of Congo,
el presidente Denis Sassou Nguesso,
President Denis Sassou Nguesso,
envió a Cuba 500 jóvenes para estudiar medicina.
sent to Cuba 500 young people to study medicine here.
Y otro aspecto que quería decirles que
And another thing that I wanted to tell you was,
desde principios de la revolución
since early days of the revolution,
ya Cuba se había proyectado sobre el continente africano.
Cuba had talked or deal with African continent.
Dadas las razones que apuntaba el compañero Orama
Due to the reasons that Orama
en
mentioned
relación a la
in
solidaridad,
relation to solidarity,
la situación que tenía Cuba de diferente con Estados Unidos, en aquella época.
situation, difference between Cuba and the U.S. those days,
Y la revolución cubana triunfó el 1 de enero del año 1959.
and a revolution time January 1st, 1959,
Y en el mes de junio,
and then June,
el comandante Che Guevara
Commander Che Guevara
ya hizo un viaje por un grupo de países
he
africanos.
visited different African countries.
O sea, visitó en aquellos momentos
Those days he visited
Egipto,
Egypt,
en aquellos momentos se llamaba la RAU, o la República Árabe Unida,
the Unified Republic,
porque formaba parte de Siria y Yemen.
because it was part of Syria and Yemen.
Visitó también Sudán
He also visited Sudan
y visitó Marruecos
and Morocco
en aquella época.
those days.
Y otro aspecto que quería puntualizarles
And another thing I wanted to stress
es que en el año 1960,
was that in 1960,
en el mes de octubre,
on October,
fue la primera visita a Cuba de un líder africano.
it was the first visit of an African leader to Cuba,
O sea, el presidente Ahmed Sekou Touré,
Ahmed Sekou Touré,
que llegó precisamente procedente de los Estados Unidos, de
that
Naciones
came
Unidas.
precisely from the United Nations in the U.S.
Y después, posteriormente, en el año 1962, también en octubre, en plena
And then,
crisis
1962 October, when we had the crisis,
de los cohetes,
missile crisis,
visitó el presidente
President Bembela,
estuvo en Cuba también.
visited Cuba too.
A pesar de que el presidente Kennedy en aquella época
Though President Kennedy those days,
le había desaconsejado que viajara a Cuba,
he recommended Bembela not to travel to Cuba, to the island.
pero el gobierno argelino
But the Algerian government,
había decidido
they have decided
de que después de la visita a Naciones Unidas
that after the visit to the United Nations
y de las entrevistas con los líderes
and
del gobierno
the
norteamericano,
interview with the U.S. Leaders,
viajar a Cuba
he traveled to Cuba
en signo de solidaridad,
to show solidarity.
por cuanto nosotros, como decía el compañero Rama,
And like Orama said,
antes de la independencia de Argelia,
before the independence of Algeria,
no solo habíamos reconocido al gobierno revolucionario de Argelia,
we do not only recognize
En el
the
serio?
revolutionary government of Algeria,
sino que también lo habíamos ayudado
but we have only helped them,
con
supported
el
them,
envío de un cargamento de armas
sending weapons
para en la lucha que mantenían ellos contra el ejército francés.
for
de
their
ocupación.
struggle against the French army.
Y como él explicaba también, bueno, en ese mismo barco
And in that same ship, vessel,
procedente de Marruecos,
coming from Morocco,
vinieron un grupo de jóvenes
a group of
y
young
de niños
men and children
y
too,
de algunos guerrilleros
some guerrillas
que
men
venían heridos
that were wounded
para Cuba.
to get to Cuba to get medical treatment.
O sea, que eran un poco, quería decirles esto desde el punto de vista de que tuviesen una idea de los vínculos que
I'm
teníamos
just saying
nosotros,
this so you could have an idea of the kind of relation link that we had.
fomentado por estos dos líderes africanos.
And this was supported by these two African leaders.
Y ahí surge, a la chica de Bembela, la primera brigada médica
And
cubana
that's why the first visit to Bembela and y la primera
brigada médica cubana
and the first Cuban medical brigade
que salió de Cuba
that,
para brindar los servicios en un país
traveled from Cuba to help that country.
que estaba integrada por 58 médicos
That
y
was
enfermeras.
confirmed by 58 doctors and nurses.
Yo que le cedo la palabra al compañero Dalmario.
I will try to replace our interpreter. Well, I've taken some notes because my two colleagues have been referring themselves to those moments when Cuba and Africa came together. And now, I agree with them totally, of course. Just two positions in relation to that. First, as you know, Cuba became a republic in 1902. That time, we were already, as we call ourselves, Afro-Cubans, blacks and all colors here. I mean, the culture was there. The culture you've been around, and you know what I mean. And elapsed. Through which, at the end of 1958, just before January the 1st, Cuba had relations with only two African countries. And they were not even at embassy level. They were some kind of diplomatic legations or something like that. It was one in Cairo and the other one in Addis Ababa. That was all that the previous governments had done in relation to Africa. So there comes January 59, and as my colleagues were saying, I mean, briefly afterwards, Che Guevara was already in Cairo. And 1 year after, 1960, Raúl Castro was also sent by Fidel to Cairo. Why Cairo? Because at that moment, almost all African national liberation movements were established in Cairo. Nasser's government had given them that possibility, and it was not then by chance. And Nasser, the Egyptian government, was playing a very important role in relation to African liberation movements. So they were there, and the connection started. After that, it was Algeria. Also, that Cuba, the Cuban revolutionary government, in terms of history also, was the first one in the world to officially recognize the Algerian revolutionary provisional government, which was coming, at that time they were friendly with Morocco, and they had their main camps there. And also Cuba was the first country in the American continent to formally recognize the first independent government in Sub-Saharan Africa, which was Ghana. They had been independent since 1957, but Cuba was the first one in the American continent to recognize Kwame Nkrumah as the president. So, why saying this? Because definitely the internationalist vocation, to call it in a way, with which the Cuban government came to the world in 1959 was very much in that direction. And then after that, many other things happened. I mean, as my colleagues have been saying. And first, as early as, according to records I have had some time, first African students, small groups of African students started to come to Cuba in 1960, 61. The first ones were from Guinea, Bahamas, and has become, in our history, perhaps one of the most important chapters we would ever be able to write in terms of not only human solidarity. I mean, when you talk of millions of people who are under colonial dominion, and you come and contribute in your own way to help them to become independent, I mean, that's it. When we talk of Southern Africa, and we talk of Angola, we talk of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, then Namibia, and because the others were more or less, and South Africa, we're talking of millions of people. Millions of people, not to mention apartheid. So, which is, as the South Africans, George Lobo used to say, it's, and all of them used to say, is a colonialism of a different type. Because it's not some white people coming from Europe now and doing this. I mean, white South Africans had already become Africans themselves when they were doing when South Africa became independent, as you know, in 1994. The whites had been there for more than 300 years. I mean, they had no metropolis where to go, as the British and the Portuguese and the others did. So, for us as Cubans, to have been able to play a role there will always be something of tremendous pride and modesty at the same time, because we cannot forget what Fidel Castro once said in relation to this, being internationalist, he was meaning Africa in this case, is paying our own debt to humanity. I mean, it's a phrase you can say, but it means a lot. And it's not just a phrase. It's very deep in the sense. We were talking about scholarships and the figure. It continues. If you look at Angola, for instance, Angolan president has been here, and it's over 2,000 Angolans going through, mainly through our universities today. If you go to South Africans, it's over 1,000. And all in all, this is a program that continues. It's okay, it has changed a little bit in the sense that those countries who can now cover the expenses, they do. But I remember perfectly the case of the Namibians in Angola. After Angolan independence, all these youngsters, not only the soldiers and women, kids, boys and girls, were just crossing the border. As you all of us remember Kasinga, the Kasinga massacre, May 4th, 78. So when the massacre took place, the decision had already been taken in Cuba to offer SWAPO school in the island of youth, as it was already been offered to many. The difference was that those coming from Angola, they were coming from a sovereign country. Those coming from Mozambique also, and the rest. So those coming from Zimbabwe before 1980, when they got independence, but the Namibians who had to wait until 1990, and South Africans 1994, I mean, it was different. There was no reference to a government. So in the case of the Namibians, I know better than I have been working with SWAPO for decades. And in Angola, it was my task politically to work with them also. So it was a case of, in Angola and a third country, first in a beautiful way, something which has not been repeated ever that I know, we created a small school in Angolan territory with the blessing of the Angolans, of course, as everything that had to be done there, where our teachers were first teaching them Spanish, the basics, so that when they came to Cuba, they could already know the basics. Well, all in all, over 2,000 SWAPO or Namibian students came to Cuba during those years. If you go back to Namibia now, and our colleague here, the name is again?
Crexy.
You have been there.
Anytime.
And you go to Namibia today and you find hundreds, thousands who say Cuba is my second motherland. And you understand why. Because they were coming from Angola, and when finishing their studies here, again going back to Angola.
And then, by the way, the Cuban leaders established a very close relation with the Algerian leaders. And that's why immediately we opened an embassy in Algeria. In that embassy, we had one of the most important Cuban commanders at that time. But also in that embassy, we have Dario Obra, we have other colleagues that started to develop relations with African liberation movements. Could you imagine that at the eve of the Algerian Revolution, a lot of all freedom fighters from Africa came to Algiers because they wanted to know the experience of the Algerian Revolution.
But they admit that whatever they have done, all the money they have done, it is Cuba who has been able to spread Spanish language in Africa. I mean, we're talking of over 40,000, even more, if you include others military and others, and we're talking of a large number of Africans who have learned Spanish, and it is an additional window to culture and to everything. And finally, I just wanted, I'm sure that all of you, perhaps most have read Piero Blejese's book, Conflicting Missions. If those of you who have read it, in my opinion, there are many books on this subject, but in my personal opinion, it is a book that after you read it, you can really say, I know what happened in Angola before and why. He has just published second part of that book, which is Visions of Freedom.
Yes.
I, frankly, declare myself unable to go beyond those books in terms of Cuban internationalism. Of course, there are many other things that we can talk, and many things that Piero Blejeses doesn't know that we know. But in terms of this piece of history, Cuban participation, contribution to African countries' independence, sovereignty, and else, we might find, I'm sure, in those books. I will definitely advise the nation the reading, because he had access and he gained the privilege to have access to Cuban archives and others, the US, Russia, Angola, even a little bit in South Africa. Although if you read South African books, they won all the wars. You never know why they left.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.